I do want to talk to you today about mink and how to protect your fish, because it's getting to be the time of year when it's January. The mink, if you're not familiar with what a mink is, it is a predator of pond fish in the wintertime especially. And mostly an isolated problem I find to Aquidneck Island. There's a very high population of mink, but they look like a black ferret. And my thought processes with them is we get the most calls, not when the pond is iced over, it's actually in the spring when it starts to recede. And so the mink doesn't want to go out into a pond and climb in a hole and try to get out on top of ice. It wants to go right over there when that ice starts receding from the rocks along this edge here. When there starts getting gaps because the ice is pulling away from the edge, the mink will go right inside your pond. The fish have been lethargic all winter long. They're pretty much asleep. And the mink just goes right down there. It doesn't have a hard time at all picking off your fish. And it doesn't want to go in there typically at this time of year, I would suspect. But by the time they stop breeding in February, I believe they stop breeding sometime February, March, they've picked off all winter long local rabbits, rodents, whatever local prey they've been picking off. All of a sudden, by February, their demand for food is going higher because they're having babies, and they've just learned that these ponds are nice, easy pickings. And so we've come up with a nice netting setup that shuts them right down, and I want to show you again an example of it right now while I got a nice sunny day. Referred to as our heavy net setup. We custom make all of these. We'll use a PVC sleeve. That's an old sleeve, so many times now we'll even use a smaller sleeve. But what we do is we put a piece of PVC pipe in the ground, and we do it up there and then again on the opposite side. In the spring, this pole will just come pulled right up. We'll throw a rock on top of it for the summertime, so you don't even know it's there. Then we take our steel post and we draw lag bolts and everything through it, and then we run a nice heavy cable from one side to the other. And this has been through a few snowstorms now. It holds up just fine. And the only thing I find that happens is once in a blue moon, if we get really heavy, big wet storms, maybe this pipe might stretch, the cable may stretch a little bit and sag a little. But for leaf debris, the reason I like it is because it's like a teepee. It keeps the core of the pond free of ponds. If you just put a net over your pond and draped it over and pulled it tight, it's always going to sag. And as soon as you get snow or heavy wet leaf debris blowing around, even though the leaves aren't getting down into your pond, they are still sagging enough that they're hitting the water. And so that's why we started working towards this. And some people will make it out of PVC pipe. They break easy in my experience, and I don't like using anything disposable. So these heavy galvanized setups with the cable, easy to install once it's all set up, works beautifully, and then disappears in the summer. But back to the net itself is the key. You can see in here on net at the edges, it's nice and tight to the ground. And what we do is we go around and take these yard staples and we pin that netting. We roll it tight and we pin it every 8 to 10 inches all around the pond. So it's nice and tight, there's no gaps, and sometimes we'll even go through, you see in some of these areas, we'll kick some of the mulch up over the top. But that's a great example of how we like to see it. There cannot be a single gap. Back when we were first designing this, I had a gentleman out in Middletown who actually confirmed for us that the mink were coming in at night, and one mink would get up on the top of the net and kind of look around, while 2 or 3 other mink would just go right around the whole edge, working their way all the way around the net, looking for a single gap to get in there. So this is a very reliable way to shut the mink down. Challenges are you got to watch your waterfalls. If this was in season, if the net doesn't go into the water of your stream, the mink will slip right in there. They are a rodent, so they're like a rat. It doesn't take very much space for a mink to get down inside there. And the mink will wipe your pond out pretty fast. And so even those fish that are down there are good 16, 18 inches, some of them. A mink would get down there and wipe them out in a weekend. So putting a net on the pond and just stapling it down is pretty easy and inexpensive insurance to make sure that the fish are happy over the winter time. So predators are a natural issue with ponds, and I'd have to say most of them we've been able to coexist just by design changes. The mink is a different creature, a creature of all its own. It's much more aggressive, and the worst part about the mink is a mink will swim into a pond and wipe out a pond over the weekend because it doesn't actually consume all the fish. So even those 16-inch koi that are in there, he doesn't go in there and eat it, get full, and maybe go back in a day or two. He goes and grabs them and will, I don't know if they're going after a gland or sucking the blood out of them, but they just make a hole like a vampire, and then that's it. They stack it up, and then they go back for another one. So taking a little precautions in the winter time, and I find that they're not as much of an issue during the summer months. So during spring and summer, unless you have mink living on your property, if they made a den somewhere on your property, that's different. They're going to keep working that pond until you either net it or they wipe out your fish. 90% of the, actually even more than that, 99% of the customers, we find that if we put a net on the pond in the wintertime, if he doesn't get your fish in the winter, he doesn't tend to check back. It can still be random, but the issue is not during the season. A mink doesn't want to swim in a pond after fast, alert fish. They have to exert a lot of energy. Wintertime, they're easy pickings. So if you know that you have mink in the area, or if you know it's a hot spot, putting a net on it, stapling them down is a great way to deter them in the wintertime. Hold off maybe a little bit later in the spring when the water warms up, do your clean out then. Odds are you'll be in good shape for the rest of the summer, and then just get that net back on the following fall. And most of the time that does rectify any issues with mink. Hope that helps. Take care.